The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning in 1882, and Isaac Langford held it with trembling fingers as he stood on the dusty platform of the Las Vegas, Nevada train station, knowing that inside was a photograph of a woman who had agreed to become his wife without ever having met him. The paper felt heavier than it should, weighted with promises and desperate hope, and when he finally tore it open, the image that stared back at him showed a dark-haired woman with serious eyes and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Her name was Clara Morgan, the letter said, and she would arrive in 3 weeks' time from St. Louis, Missouri, ready to begin a new life as the wife of a rancher she knew only through carefully worded correspondence. Isaac folded the letter carefully and tucked it into his vest pocket, feeling the desert sun beat down on his shoulders as he walked back toward his horse. The town of Las Vegas sprawled before him, a collection of adobe buildings and false-fronted stores clustered around the railroad tracks, with the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert stretching out in every direction. He had built a decent life here over the past 8 years, working his way up from a ranch hand to the owner of a small but profitable cattle operation 15 miles outside of town. At 28 years old, he had land, livestock, and a sturdy 2-room house that needed a woman's touch. What he did not have was companionship, and the loneliness had begun to eat at him like a slow-acting poison. The decision to send for a mail-order bride had not come easily. Isaac had agonized over the wording of his advertisement, trying to strike a balance between honesty and hope. He had described himself truthfully: tall, fair-haired, hard-working, with a ranch that was small but growing. He had mentioned his love of books and his belief in treating people fairly, regardless of their station. What he had not mentioned was the aching emptiness that filled his days, or the way he sometimes spoke aloud to his horses just to hear a voice, even if it was his own. Clara's response had arrived 6 weeks after he placed the advertisement. Her letter had been brief, written in a careful, formal hand that suggested each word had been chosen with great deliberation. She was 23 years old, she wrote, and had worked as a seamstress in St. Louis since she was 14. She had no family to speak of, her parents having died of cholera when she was young, and she had been raised in a Catholic orphanage until she was old enough to work. She was healthy, God-fearing, and willing to work hard. She understood the arrangement would be a practical one, but she hoped that respect and perhaps affection might grow between them over time. What struck Isaac most about the letter was what it did not say. There was no mention of dreams or desires, no hint of personality beyond the bare facts of her existence. It was as though she had deliberately stripped away anything that might reveal the person beneath the words, presenting herself as a blank slate upon which he could write whatever he needed. The thought had both intrigued and saddened him. They had exchanged 3 more letters over the following months, each one slightly longer and more personal than the last. Isaac had told her about the ranch, about the challenges of raising cattle in the harsh Nevada climate, about the town and its rough-edged inhabitants. Clara had shared small details about her life in St. Louis, about the long hours spent bent over needle and thread, about the boarding house where she lived with 7 other working women in cramped, airless rooms. Her letters revealed a sharp intelligence and a dry wit that appeared occasionally between the carefully constructed sentences, like wildflowers blooming in unexpected places. Now, as the day of her arrival drew near, Isaac found himself consumed with nervous anticipation. He cleaned his house from top to bottom, enlisted the help of his nearest neighbor's wife to make curtains for the windows, and bought a new brass bed frame that he assembled with painstaking care. He practiced conversations in his head, imagining what he would say when he first saw her, how he would put her at ease, how he would begin the delicate process of turning two strangers into something resembling a married couple. The 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anxiety. Isaac rode into town on the morning of Clara's scheduled arrival, wearing his best shirt and trousers, his hair still damp from the vigorous washing he had given it at the pump behind his house. The train was due at noon, and he arrived at the station a full hour early, pacing the platform like a caged animal while the station master watched with barely concealed amusement. When the train finally pulled in, belching steam and cinders, Isaac felt his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst through his ribs. Passengers began to disembark, a steady stream of dusty, travel-worn humanity spilling out onto the platform. He scanned each face anxiously, looking for the woman from the photograph, and then he saw her. Clara Morgan stepped down from the train with a small carpet bag clutched in both hands, her dark hair pinned up beneath a simple bonnet, her dress wrinkled and stained from days of travel. She looked smaller than he had imagined, more fragile, and there was a wariness in her eyes that made his chest tighten. She stood on the platform, visibly overwhelmed by the heat and the noise and the strangeness of it all, and for a moment, Isaac saw her as she truly was. A young woman who had gambled everything on the hope that life with a stranger in a harsh land might be better than what she was leaving behind. He stepped forward, removing his hat. "Miss Morgan, I'm Isaac Langford." She turned toward him, and he saw relief flash across her face, followed quickly by something else, something he could not quite identify. "Mr. Langford, I'm pleased to meet you." Her voice was softer than he had expected, with a slight rasp that suggested she was not accustomed to speaking much. They stood there for a moment, simply looking at each other, and Isaac realized with a start that she was even more beautiful than her photograph had suggested. There was a strength in her face, a determination in the set of her jaw that the camera had not captured. "The wagon is just over here," he said finally, gesturing toward where his horse and wagon waited in the shade of the station building. "It's about a 2-hour drive to the ranch. I thought we might stop by the hotel first if you would like to rest and freshen up. The preacher can marry us this afternoon, or we can wait until tomorrow if you prefer." Something flickered in her eyes, and she looked away. "This afternoon would be fine. I see no reason to delay." Isaac picked up her bag, surprised by how light it was, and led her toward the wagon. As they walked, he tried to think of something to say, some way to bridge the awkward silence that stretched between them. "How was your journey? The trains can be quite uncomfortable, I know." "It was long," she replied simply, "but I am here now." He helped her up onto the wagon seat, and she arranged her skirts carefully, her movements precise and controlled. As Isaac climbed up beside her and took the reins, he noticed how she held herself slightly apart from him, as though afraid that any accidental contact might be presumptuous. They rode through town in near silence, with Isaac pointing out various landmarks, the general store, the saloon, the small church where they would be married. Clara nodded at each one but offered little in response. It was not until they were approaching the church that she finally spoke. "Mr. Langford, there is something I need to tell you before we proceed." He pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to look at her, his stomach knotting with sudden anxiety. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands twisting together in her lap. "In my letters to you, I was not entirely truthful about something. I told you that I worked as a seamstress, and that is true. But what I did not tell you is that I cannot read or write." Isaac stared at her, trying to process what she had just said. "But your letters were written by another woman at the boarding house," Clara said quietly, her cheeks flushing with shame. "I told her what to say, and she wrote the words, 'I am sorry for the deception. I know you value education, and I understand if you no longer wish to marry me. I can work to earn money for a train ticket back to St. Louis." The vulnerability in her voice, the way she could not quite meet his eyes, made something crack open in Isaac's chest. He had spent so many years feeling alone, feeling like there was no one in the world who truly understood what it meant to need something so desperately that you would risk everything for it. And here was this woman, who had traveled more than 1,000 miles on the strength of words she could not even read herself, trusting in the honesty of a man she had never met. "Clara," he said gently, and she looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't want you to go back to St. Louis. I want you to stay here and marry me just as we planned. But I cannot raid," she whispered. "I cannot even sign my own name. I can only make an X." "Then I will teach you," Isaac said, the words coming out before he had fully thought them through. "I will teach you everything. Reading, writing, whatever you want to learn. We will work on it together." She searched his face, clearly trying to determine if he was sincere or simply being kind. "You would do that. You would take the time. Clara, I have all the time in the world. And I think perhaps you and I are more alike than you realize. We have both been alone for too long, and we have both taken a great risk in hoping that things might be different. I do not expect perfection from you. I only hope that we can be honest with each other and try to build something good together." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly with the back of her hand. "I will work hard," she said fiercely. "I will keep your house and cook your meals and mend your clothes, and I will learn everything you are willing to teach me. I promise you that." "I believe you," Isaac said simply. He picked up the reins again, feeling something shift between them, some invisible barrier beginning to crack. "Now, shall we go get married?" The ceremony was brief and practical, conducted by a weary-looking preacher in a church that smelled of dust and candle wax. Clara signed the marriage certificate with a careful X, and Isaac signed his full name beside it, trying not to think about the symbolism of those two marks side by side. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Isaac leaned down to kiss Clara's cheek, not wanting to presume too much, and felt her stiffen briefly before relaxing into the touch. They stopped at the general store afterward, where Isaac bought supplies for the week ahead and introduced Clara to the store owner and his wife. The couple was warm and welcoming, and Isaac saw some of the tension ease from Clara's shoulders as they chatted about recipes and sewing patterns. It was clear that she was more comfortable talking about practical matters than personal ones, and he filed that observation away for later. The ride out to the ranch took them through increasingly rugged terrain, the road climbing steadily into the foothills of the mountains that rose to the west of Las Vegas. Clara was silent for most of the journey, her eyes taking in everything. The vast expanse of sagebrush and creosote, the distant purple mountains, the hawks circling overhead in the cloudless sky. Isaac found himself watching her reactions, trying to gauge what she was thinking, whether she was frightened or excited or simply exhausted. When the ranch finally came into view, Isaac felt a swell of pride mixed with anxiety. It was not much, just a sturdy house built of adobe and timber, a barn, a corral, and several outbuildings. But it was his, built with his own hands and the sweat of 8 hard years, and he desperately wanted Clara to see its potential, not just its current humble state. "It's not fancy," he said as he pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. "But it's solid, and it will keep you safe and dry. I have about 200 head of cattle right now and some chickens for eggs. There is a good well with clean water, and the vegetable garden needs work, but the soil is decent if you know what you are doing." Clara climbed down from the wagon without waiting for his assistance, her eyes scanning the buildings and the land beyond. "It is more than I expected," she said quietly. "Much more." Isaac carried her bag into the house, feeling suddenly self-conscious about the simplicity of it all. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a cast-iron stove, a rough wooden table with 4 chairs, and a pair of worn armchairs near the fireplace. A bookshelf stood against one wall, crammed with volumes in various states of disrepair. The bedroom was through a door to the left, and Isaac had put fresh sheets on the new brass bed that morning, along with the quilt his mother had made before she died. Clara walked slowly through the space, running her fingers along the table, examining the stove, looking at everything with an intensity that made Isaac nervous. Finally, she turned to face him. "Where would you like me to sleep?" The question caught him off guard. "In the bedroom." "Where else would you sleep? And where will you sleep?" Isaac realized with a start that she was asking about the sleeping arrangements, about whether he expected her to share his bed immediately. "I will sleep in the bedroom as well," he said carefully, "but I will not. That is, I do not expect. We can take things slowly. Get to know each other first." Relief washed over her face, so obvious that it made his heart ache. "Thank you," she whispered. They moved around each other carefully for the rest of that first day, each hyper-aware of the other's presence. Clara insisted on making dinner, and Isaac watched as she worked with calm efficiency, producing a simple but satisfying meal of beans, biscuits, and fried salt pork. They ate in near silence, the scrape of forks against tin plates the only sound beyond the occasional creak of the house settling. That night, they lay in the darkness on opposite sides of the bed, a careful expanse of space between them. Isaac could hear Clara's breathing, shallow and quick, and knew she was not asleep. He stared at the ceiling, wondering if he had made a terrible mistake, if they would spend the rest of their lives as polite strangers sharing a house. "Isaac." Her voice was so quiet he almost missed it. "Yes. Thank you for not sending me back." "You don't need to thank me for that, Clara." "Yes, I do. You could have. Most men would have." He turned his head toward her in the darkness, though he could not see her face. "I am not most men, and I meant what I said. I will teach you to read and write. We can start tomorrow if you would like." There was a long pause. "I would like that very much." The next morning, after breakfast and the completion of the most essential chores, Isaac cleared the kitchen table and brought out a slate and chalk from his supplies. Clara watched him nervously, her hands folded in her lap. "We will start with the alphabet," Isaac said, settling into the chair beside her rather than across from her. "Have you had any schooling at all?" Clara shook her head. "The orphanage had lessons, but I was always needed in the kitchen or the laundry. And after I started working, there was no time. I know some letters by sight from signs and such, but I cannot put them together into words." "That's all right. We will build from there." Isaac wrote the letter on the slate. "This is the letter A. It makes the sound at the beginning of the word apple." They worked for an hour, going through the first few letters of the alphabet. Clara was intensely focused, her brow furrowed with concentration as she copied each letter onto the slate. Her hands, rough from years of hard work, gripped the chalk awkwardly at first, but she adjusted quickly, watching how Isaac held his and mimicking his movements. "You are a fast learner," Isaac said, impressed by how quickly she absorbed the information. "I have to be," Clara replied, not looking up from the slate. "I have wasted too much time already." Over the following weeks they fell into a routine. Mornings were for chores, feeding the animals, checking on the cattle, tending the garden. Afternoons were for lessons, an hour or sometimes 2 of focused work on reading and writing. Evenings they spent in companionable silence, with Isaac reading aloud from his collection of books while Clara mended clothes or worked on her letters. It was during these evening readings that Isaac began to see glimpses of the woman beneath Clara's carefully controlled exterior. She would ask questions about the stories, insightful questions that revealed how carefully she was listening, how much she was absorbing. She laughed at the funny parts, gasped at the dramatic moments, and once, during a particularly sad passage, he looked over to see tears streaming silently down her face. "You want me to stop?" he asked gently. She shook her head. "No, I want to know what happens. It is just that I have never felt this before about a story. I did not know words could make you feel so much." Isaac's throat tightened. "That is the magic of writing. It lets you live 1,000 lives, go to places you will never see, understand people you will never meet. And soon you will be able to experience that for yourself whenever you want." Clara looked at him with such intensity that he felt exposed, seen in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "You love books," she said. It was not a question. "I do. They saved me, in a way, when I first came out here. I was so lonely, and the books reminded me that there was a whole world beyond this desert, that I was not alone in what I was feeling." "Is that why you sent for a wife? Because you were lonely?" The directness of the question surprised him. "Yes, partly. I also wanted someone to share this life with, someone to build something with. The ranch is growing, but it feels pointless sometimes, working toward a future that I will experience alone." Clara nodded slowly. "I understand. That is why I answered your advertisement in St. Louis. I could see my whole life stretched out before me, and it was the same gray day repeating over and over until I died. I wanted something different, even if it was hard, even if it was frightening." "Are you still frightened?" She considered the question. "A little, but less than I was. You have been kind to me, kinder than I had any right to expect, and I am learning so much. Sometimes I wake up in the morning and I cannot believe that this is my life now, that I get to spend my days learning instead of just surviving." Something shifted in Isaac's chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire crackling in the hearth. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Her fingers were rough against his, but they curled into his palm trustingly. "I am glad you are here, Clara," he said quietly. "More glad than I know how to say." She squeezed his hand, and when she looked at him, there was something in her eyes that had not been there before, something that looked almost like hope. As the weeks turned into months, Clara's progress with reading and writing accelerated rapidly. She practiced constantly, writing out words on the slate during every spare moment, reading signs and labels and anything else she could find. Isaac brought home newspapers from town, and they would read them together, with Clara sounding out the words slowly at first, then with increasing confidence. But it was not just her literacy that was growing. Isaac watched as Clara began to relax into her new life, as the wariness in her eyes gradually gave way to something softer. She smiled more easily now, and sometimes he would hear her singing quietly to herself as she worked in the garden. She had a lovely voice, clear and pure, and it never failed to make him stop whatever he was doing just to listen. They were becoming friends, Isaac realized. Perhaps more than friends. There was an easiness between them now that had not existed in those first awkward days. They could work side by side in comfortable silence, or talk for hours about everything and nothing. Clara had strong opinions about things, he discovered, and she was not afraid to argue with him when she disagreed. He found he liked that, liked the spark in her eyes when she was passionate about something, liked the way she challenged him to think differently. It was the little things that got to him, though. The way she would pour his coffee in the morning without him asking, remembering exactly how he liked it. The way she had mended his favorite shirt, the one with the torn elbow, so carefully that he could barely see the stitches. The way she looked at him sometimes when she thought he was not watching, with an expression he could not quite read, but that made his heart race nonetheless. They still slept on opposite sides of the bed, that invisible line between them as firm as ever. But sometimes, in the morning, Isaac would wake to find that they had drifted together during the night, Clara's hand resting against his arm or her head on his shoulder. She never acknowledged these moments, and neither did he, but he found himself looking forward to them, cherishing the brief illusion of closeness before they both woke fully and returned to their respective sides. 4 months after Clara's arrival, Isaac had to make a trip into town for supplies. Clara asked if she could come with him, and he agreed readily, pleased at the idea of showing her off, of introducing her properly to the townspeople as his wife rather than the shy, frightened woman who had arrived on the train that day in late summer. They made a day of it, stopping at the general store, the feed store, and the smithy. Clara was warmly received everywhere they went, and Isaac felt a surge of pride as he watched her chat confidently with the store owners and their wives. She was becoming part of the community, putting down roots, and the knowledge filled him with a satisfaction he had not anticipated. It was at the general store that something unexpected happened. The store owner's wife, a kind woman named Margaret, pulled Clara aside while Isaac was loading supplies into the wagon. "I wanted to give you this," Margaret said, pressing a small leather-bound book into Clara's hands. "It's a journal. I thought you might like to practice your writing in it. Isaac told my husband how hard you have been working on your lessons, and I think that is wonderful. Not many people have the courage to learn something new as adults." Clara stared at the book, running her fingers over the smooth leather. "I cannot accept this. It is too fine." "Nonsense. I want you to have it. You are a good woman, Clara Langford, and this town is lucky to have you." When Clara climbed back onto the wagon, she was clutching the journal like it was made of gold. Isaac glanced at her questioningly, and she explained what had happened, her voice thick with emotion. "She thinks I am good," Clara said wonderingly. "She barely knows me, but she thinks I am good." "You are good," Isaac said firmly. "Everyone can see that, Clara. Everyone except you, apparently." That night after dinner, Clara opened the journal to the first blank page. She sat for a long time with the pen poised over the paper, clearly trying to decide what to write. Finally, in careful, slightly shaky letters, she wrote, "My name is Clara Langford, and I am learning to read." Isaac, reading over her shoulder, felt his eyes sting with unexpected tears. "That is perfect," he said hoarsely. "Just perfect." Clara turned to look at him, and something in his expression must have given him away because her eyes widened. "Isaac, are you crying? I am proud of you," he said simply. "So damned proud I can hardly stand it." She set the pen down carefully and turned to face him fully. They were sitting close together at the table, closer than they usually sat, and Isaac was suddenly intensely aware of every inch of space between them. Clara reached up slowly and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his cheek. "You are a good man, Isaac Langford," she whispered. "The best man I have ever known." And then, before he could think better of it, before he could talk himself out of it, Isaac leaned forward and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and questioning, and for a moment Clara froze. But then she was kissing him back, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and Isaac felt like the world had tilted on its axis. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Clara was looking at him with wonder in her eyes. "I did not think," she began, then stopped, shaking her head. "I hoped, but I did not let myself truly believe that you might feel that way about me. Clara, I have been falling in love with you since the day you told me you could not read and asked me to teach you anyway. You are brave and strong and smart, and every day I wake up grateful that you took a chance on a lonely cowboy with a small ranch and too many books. I love you too, Clara said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I have loved you for weeks now, maybe longer, but I was afraid to say it. Afraid that I was just convenient, that you were being kind but did not truly want me the way I wanted you. Isaac pulled her into his arms, holding her close, feeling her heart racing against his chest. I want you, he said fiercely. I want you in every way possible. I want to wake up with you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to teach you everything I know and learn everything you have to teach me. I want to build a real marriage with you, Clara. A real life. She pulled back just enough to look at him, tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, really smiling in a way he had never seen before. Then teach me, she said. Teach me everything. That night, the invisible line down the center of the bed disappeared forever. Isaac and Clara came together with a tenderness and passion that surprised them both, and when they finally fell asleep, tangled together in the darkness, they were no longer two separate people sharing a space but truly husband and wife in every sense of the word. The next morning, Isaac woke to find Clara already up, sitting at the table with her journal open in front of her. He walked over and looked over her shoulder at what she had written. I love my husband. He has taught me to read and he has taught me to hope. I am not alone anymore. He kissed the top of her head and she leaned back against him with a contented sigh. What would you like to do today? He asked. Everything, she replied, grinning up at him. I want to do everything. The seasons changed, summer giving way to the cooler days of autumn, and then the harsh cold of a Nevada winter. Isaac and Clara worked side by side, preparing the ranch for the difficult months ahead. They brought the cattle down from the high pastures, stocked up on supplies, and winterized the buildings against the snow and wind that would soon arrive. Through it all, the lessons continued. Clara was reading books on her own now, slowly but steadily, and she had filled half of her journal with observations and thoughts and little stories. Isaac marveled at her progress, at the way she had blossomed from the frightened woman on the train platform into someone confident and capable. But more than that, he marveled at the depth of feeling that had grown between them. They were partners in every sense of the word, working together, planning together, dreaming together about the future. The loneliness that had driven Isaac to send for a mail-order bride was a distant memory now, replaced by a fullness, a sense of completion that he had not known was possible. One evening in late November, as they sat by the fire, Clara suddenly set down the book she was reading and looked at Isaac with a serious expression. I want to tell you about my life before I came here, she said. All of it. I think it is time you knew. Isaac put down his own book and gave her his full attention. You do not have to tell me anything you are not ready to share. I know. But I want to. I want you to understand where I came from, what made me who I am. And so she told him. She told him about growing up in the orphanage, about the casual cruelty of the nuns who ran it, about the constant hunger and the endless work. She told him about being sent out to work as a seamstress at 14, about the long hours in a dim, airless room, sewing until her fingers bled. She told him about the boarding house where she lived, about the other women there, most of them trapped in the same grinding poverty, slowly losing hope that life would ever be different. I watched those women grow old before their time, Clara said quietly. Watched them become bitter and hard, watched the light go out of their eyes. And I knew that if I stayed, the same thing would happen to me. So when I saw your advertisement, I answered it the same day. I made my friend write the letter and I told her exactly what to say, and I prayed that you would choose me out of all the women who must have responded. I am glad I did, Isaac said, reaching for her hand. So glad, Clara, but I hate that you went through all of that. I hate that you suffered. It made me strong, she said simply. It taught me to value what I have, to never take anything for granted, and it brought me here to you, so I cannot regret it, even the hard parts." Isaac pulled her close, holding her tight, wishing he could go back in time and protect her from all the pain she had endured. But she was right. Her past had shaped her, had made her into the remarkable woman she was, and he loved every part of her, including the scars. "I have something I want to show you," he said suddenly. He went to the bookshelf and pulled out a slim volume with a worn cover. "This was my mother's. She loved poetry, and she used to read to me from it when I was young. I want you to have it." Clara took the book reverently, opening it carefully. The pages were yellowed with age, and there were notes in the margins, written in a delicate hand. "Are you certain? This is precious to you." "You are precious to me," Isaac said, "and I think my mother would have loved you. She would have been proud of how hard you have worked, how much you have learned. She believed that education was the key to freedom, that anyone could rise above their circumstances if they had access to knowledge. You embody that belief, Clara. You are living proof of it." Clara pressed the book to her chest, tears glistening in her eyes. "I will treasure it always, and I will read every page, I promise you that." Winter settled in hard that year, with snow piling up in drifts against the house and temperatures dropping well below freezing. Isaac and Clara were often confined to the house for days at a time, venturing out only to tend to the animals and haul in firewood. But rather than feeling trapped, they relished the enforced closeness, the long, quiet hours spent reading together or talking or simply being near each other. It was during one of those long winter nights that Clara told Isaac she was pregnant. They had just finished dinner, and she had been unusually quiet, picking at her food. Finally, she set down her fork and looked at him directly. "Isaac, I need to tell you something. I am going to have a baby." For a moment, Isaac could not process the words. He stared at her, his mind blank. And then the meaning crashed over him like a wave, and he was on his feet, pulling her into his arms, laughing and crying at the same time. "A baby," he said, his voice breaking. "Clara, we are going to have a baby." She was crying too, but smiling through her tears. "Are you happy? I know we have not been married long, and the ranch is still small, but I thought—" "Happy, Clara, I am so happy I can barely breathe. This is the best news I have ever received. You are the best thing that has ever happened to me, and now we are going to have a child. Our child." They held each other for a long time, swaying slightly, lost in the enormity of what was to come. Isaac thought about the future, about teaching his child to read just as he had taught Clara, about watching them grow up on the ranch with the mountains rising in the distance and the wide Nevada sky overhead. It felt like a dream, too good to be true, but Clara was solid and warm in his arms, and the life growing inside her was real. "I will take care of you," he promised. "Both of you. I will work harder than I have ever worked to make sure you have everything you need." "We have everything we need right now," Clara said, pulling back to look at him. "We have each other. Everything else is just details." The winter passed slowly, and with each week, Clara's pregnancy became more obvious. Isaac fussed over her constantly, insisting that she rest more, that she not lift anything heavy, that she take care of herself. Clara tolerated his hovering with good-natured patience, though she continued to do most of her usual work, insisting that she was pregnant, not ill. They spent the long evenings planning for the baby's arrival. Isaac built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk. Clara sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her needle flashing in the firelight. They argued cheerfully about names, with Isaac favoring something traditional and Clara preferring something less common. "We will decide when we meet the baby," Clara said finally. "We will look at this tiny person and know what their name should be." Spring came late that year, but when it finally arrived, it was glorious. The snow melted, wildflowers bloomed across the desert, and the cattle that had survived the winter grew fat on the new grass. Isaac hired on a ranch hand to help with the increased workload, a young man named Tom who was hardworking and respectful. This freed up more of Isaac's time to be with Clara, who was growing larger and more uncomfortable as her due date approached. The baby came in early June, arriving in the middle of the night with no warning. Isaac rode into town to fetch the midwife, his heart in his throat, terrified that something would go wrong. But by the time he returned with Mrs. Henderson, the midwife, Clara had already delivered a healthy baby boy entirely on her own. "I could not wait," she said, exhausted but beaming, the baby cradled against her chest. "He was in a hurry to meet us." Isaac approached slowly, awed by the sight of his wife and newborn son. The baby was tiny and red-faced, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right through him. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered. "You are amazing, Clara. I cannot believe you did this alone." "I am tougher than I look," she replied, smiling. "Would you like to hold your son?" Isaac took the baby carefully, terrified of dropping him or holding him wrong. But the moment his son was in his arms, something fundamental shifted inside him. This was his child, his and Clara's, a new life that they had created together. He felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly brought him to his knees. "Hello, little one," he said softly. "Welcome to the world. You have the best mother in existence, and I promise I will do everything in my power to be the father you deserve." They named him James, after Isaac's father, but they called him Jamie from the start. He was a good baby, content to sleep in his cradle while Clara worked or nursed peacefully in her arms. Isaac could not stop staring at him, marveling at his tiny fingers and toes, the way he would grip Isaac's finger with surprising strength. Life on the ranch took on a new rhythm. The days were full of work and responsibility, but they were also full of joy. Clara continued her reading and writing, now with Jamie sleeping beside her while she worked. Isaac would come in from the fields to find her reading aloud to the baby, her voice soft and musical, and his heart would swell with love for both of them. "He likes the poetry," Clara announced one day. "He stops fussing when I read to him." "He has good taste," Isaac replied, dropping a kiss on top of her head, "just like his mother." As Jamie grew, so did the ranch. Isaac was able to expand his herd, buy more land, hire another ranch hand. The small operation that had sustained him as a bachelor was becoming a thriving business, and he knew it was because he was no longer doing it alone. Clara managed the house and the accounts with the same fierce determination she had brought to learning to read, and her insights and ideas helped him make better decisions. But more than the financial success, more than the growing prosperity, what mattered to Isaac was the family they had built. Clara was no longer the frightened mail-order bride who could not read or write. She was his partner, his equal, his best friend. She had published a small piece in the local newspaper, an essay about education and second chances that had moved many readers to tears. She had started teaching some of the other women in the area to read, holding lessons in their kitchen once a week, and she was happy. Isaac could see it in everything she did, in the way she sang while she worked, in the way she laughed freely, in the way she looked at him with such love that it took his breath away. One evening, when Jamie was almost a year old, they sat on the porch together watching the sun set over the mountains. Jamie was asleep in Clara's arms, and Isaac had his arm around her shoulders. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Isaac wanted to freeze in time and live in forever. "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have been if you had not answered my advertisement?" Isaac asked. Clara considered the question. "Sometimes, but not with regret, only with gratitude that I found the courage to take that chance." I think about it often, Isaac admitted. I think about how lonely I was, how empty my life felt. And then you arrived and everything changed. You changed me, Clara. You made me better, made me want to be better. You did the same for me, she said quietly. You saw potential in me that I did not see in myself. You believed I could learn, could be more than I was. And you taught me, just like you promised. You taught me everything. Not everything, Isaac said, smiling. You taught me just as much. You taught me about courage and resilience. You taught me that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be. You taught me what love really means. Clara turned to look at him, her eyes shining in the fading light. I love you, Isaac Langford. I loved you when I could barely write my own name, and I love you now, and I will love you for the rest of my life. And I love you, Clara Langford, my brilliant, beautiful, brave wife. I will never stop being grateful that you chose me, that you trusted me, that you built this life with me. They kissed as the sun disappeared below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple and gold. Jamie stirred slightly in Clara's arms but did not wake, content and safe in the love that surrounded him. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts that threatened the cattle, harsh winters that tested their endurance, illness and injury, and all the uncertainties that came with ranch life in the 1880s. But Isaac and Clara faced everything together, drawing strength from each other, and from the family they continued to build. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Rose, who arrived when Jamie was 3, and another son they named Thomas, who came 2 years after that. The house that had once felt so empty was now filled with noise and laughter and the chaos of raising 3 young children. Clara homeschooled all of them, determined that they would grow up with the education she had been denied. And Isaac marveled at watching her teach their children to read with the same patient determination Isaac had once shown her. Jamie grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books as much as his father. Rose was wild and fearless, always climbing trees and chasing after the ranch hands. Thomas was quiet and observant, content to sit for hours watching the cattle or the clouds moving across the sky. Isaac loved each of them fiercely, loved watching them grow and change, loved seeing traces of both himself and Clara in their faces and personalities. But it was Clara herself who remained the center of his world. She was still writing, still teaching, still learning new things with the same enthusiasm she had brought to those first halting lessons with the alphabet. She had become a respected member of the community, someone people came to for advice and guidance. And she was still the woman he fell in love with, still brave and strong and beautiful, still capable of surprising him with her insights and her humor and her boundless capacity for love. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Isaac presented Clara with a gift. It was a small printing press he had ordered from back east, shipped by train to Las Vegas, and then hauled out to the ranch with great difficulty and expense. "What is this?" Clara asked, walking around the contraption with wonder in her eyes. "It is a printing press," Isaac said, unable to contain his excitement. "I thought you might want to print your own newspaper or pamphlets or whatever you want. You have so many things to say, Clara, and I want everyone to be able to read them." Clara turned to him with tears streaming down her face. "Isaac Langford, you are the most extraordinary man I have ever known. Do you realize that? You have given me everything, everything." "You gave me everything first," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "You gave me a reason to wake up in the morning. You gave me a family, a purpose, a life worth living. A printing press is nothing compared to that." "It is everything," she said fiercely. "It is everything because it means you see me, really see me, and you believe in what I can do. That is the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, and you give it to me every single day." They held each other for a long time, there in the barn with the printing press gleaming in the afternoon light. Around them, they could hear the sounds of the ranch, Jamie calling to his siblings, the cattle lowing in the distance, the wind rustling through the cottonwood trees. It was the sound of home, of family, of a life built from nothing by two people who had dared to hope for something better. Clara did indeed start a newspaper, a small monthly publication that she printed on her press and distributed throughout the region. She wrote about ranching and education, about women's rights and community building, about the importance of literacy and the power of stories. Her words reached people all over Nevada and beyond, and she received letters from readers who told her how much her writing had meant to them, how it had inspired them to make changes in their own lives. Isaac was proud beyond measure, but not surprised. He had always known Clara was capable of extraordinary things. He had seen it from the first moment she confessed she could not read, when she could have fled in shame but instead asked him to teach her. That courage, that determination, had never wavered. It had only grown stronger over the years. As their children grew older and more independent, Isaac and Clara found themselves with more time together, just the two of them. They would take long rides across the ranch, talking about everything and nothing, or sit on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and counting their blessings. The passion between them had never faded, only deepened and matured into something richer and more complex. "You remember that first night?" Clara asked one evening, her head resting on Isaac's shoulder. "When we signed the marriage certificate and you brought me here?" "I remember every detail," Isaac replied. "I was terrified I would do something wrong, say something wrong that you would regret coming here. I was terrified too. I kept thinking you would change your mind once you realized I was not what you expected, but you never did. You just kept being kind, kept being patient, kept believing in me even when I did not believe in myself. You made it easy," Isaac said. "You worked so hard, tried so hard. How could I not believe in you?" "I worked hard because you made me feel like I mattered," Clara said. "Like I was worth the effort. No one had ever made me feel that way before." Isaac turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. "You matter more than anything in this world. You are the best decision I ever made, Clara Langford, the very best." They kissed as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them that first awkward night 10 years ago, the same stars that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to partners, to soulmates. The ranch continued to prosper, and Isaac and Clara became fixtures in the Las Vegas community. They were known for their generosity and their progressive views, for the way they treated their ranch hands fairly and paid them well, for Clara's educational initiatives and Isaac's willingness to help anyone who needed it. They were respected and admired, but more importantly, they were happy. Jamie eventually took over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch, freeing Isaac and Clara to focus on other interests. Rose married a young doctor and moved to Virginia City, where she opened a school for girls. Thomas showed no interest in ranching at all, instead becoming fascinated with engineering, and Isaac sent him to San Francisco to study at a technical institute. "Our children are leaving us," Clara said wistfully one day, watching Thomas ride away toward the train station. "They are building their own lives," Isaac corrected gently, "just like we did. We raised them to be independent and strong. We should be proud." "I am proud," Clara said, "so proud I could burst, but I will miss them." "We will visit," Isaac promised, "and they will come back. This will always be home to them, just like it is home to us." And he was right. The children did come back, bringing spouses and eventually grandchildren. The house that Isaac had built for himself as a lonely bachelor became the gathering place for a large, boisterous, loving family. Clara taught the grandchildren to read just as she had taught their parents, and Isaac told them stories about the old days, about mail-order brides and empty ranches, and the courage it takes to build a life from nothing. On their 25th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. There was food and music and laughter, and Isaac looked around at all the faces, at the children and grandchildren and friends who filled his home, and felt a profound sense of gratitude. But it was later, after everyone had gone to bed, when he and Clara stood on the porch looking out at the moonlit desert, that he felt the full weight of what they had accomplished. "We did it," he said quietly. "We built something real and lasting, something good." "We did," Clara agreed. She pulled out a folded piece of paper from her pocket and handed it to him. "I wrote something for you, for this anniversary." Isaac unfolded the paper and read the words written in Clara's elegant script, so different from the shaky letters she had produced on that slate so many years ago. 25 years ago, I arrived in Nevada as a woman who could not read or write, who had nothing but hope and desperation to recommend her. I met a man who saw past my limitations to the person I could become. He said, "I will teach you everything," and he kept that promise. But he taught me so much more than reading and writing. He taught me to believe in myself, to take risks, to love without fear. He gave me a life beyond my wildest dreams, not because of his wealth or his status, but because of his kindness and his faith in me. Isaac Langford, you are the love of my life, my partner, my teacher, my best friend. Everything good in my life flows from the day I stepped off that train and into your arms. I love you today as I have loved you every day for the past 25 years, with my whole heart and soul. Yours always, Clara. Isaac's hands were shaking by the time he finished reading. He folded the paper carefully and tucked it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart. "Clara," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I do not have the words." "You do not need words," she said, smiling through her tears. "You have shown me every day how much you love me. That is more than enough." They held each other under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds, who had built a life and a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. The desert wind whispered around them, carrying the scent of sage and dust and possibility, the same wind that had blown on that hot day when Clara first arrived, scared and uncertain but willing to take a chance on a cowboy who promised to teach her everything. And he had kept that promise. He had taught her to read and write, yes, but he had also taught her to trust, to hope, to love. And in return, she had taught him that the bravest thing a person can do is open their heart to another. That true partnership means seeing each other's strengths and weaknesses and choosing to build something together anyway. That love is not something that happens to you, but something you create through daily acts of kindness and patience and faith. The years continued to pass as years do. Isaac and Clara grew older, their hair turning gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared experiences and mutual respect. They still read together every evening, still sat on the porch watching the sunset, still reached for each other in the night. Jamie took over the ranch completely, running it with the same integrity and care his parents had shown. He brought in new ideas and modern techniques, and the operation continued to grow and prosper. But he always consulted with Isaac and Clara, valuing their wisdom and experience, making them feel useful and valued even as they stepped back from active management. Clara's newspaper had become quite influential, and she had published several collections of her essays in book form. She was invited to speak at gatherings throughout the West, and though she still felt nervous before each appearance, she always said yes. Isaac accompanied her whenever he could, sitting in the audience and beaming with pride as his wife captivated crowds with her words and her presence. "Who would have thought," Clara said one evening as they traveled back from a speaking engagement in Reno, "that a girl who could not write her own name would someday be giving speeches to hundreds of people?" "I would have thought," Isaac replied. "I always knew you were capable of amazing things, Clara. I saw it from the very beginning." "You saw something in me that I did not see in myself," she said. "That is your gift, Isaac. You see the best in people and help them become it." "I see what is already there," he countered. "I just give people permission to let it out." They were both in their 60s now, their children grown and grandchildren well on their way to adulthood. They had great-grandchildren too, bright-eyed toddlers who called them Gran and Gramps and climbed all over them without fear. Isaac and Clara spoiled them shamelessly, indulging them in ways they had never indulged their own children, making up for lost time and reveling in the simple joy of family. One evening, as they sat together in their favorite chairs by the fire, Clara reading a book and Isaac working on some accounts, she suddenly looked up at him with an expression he could not quite read. "What is it?" he asked, setting down his pencil. "I was just thinking about that first lesson," she said. "Do you remember? You wrote the letter on the slate, and you told me it made the sound at the beginning of the word apple. And I thought to myself, I will never be able to learn all of this. There are too many letters, too many sounds, too many words. It is impossible." "But you did learn," Isaac said. "You learned all of it and more." "I learned because you believed I could," Clara replied. "Because you sat with me day after day and never lost patience, never made me feel stupid, never suggested that maybe I should just give up. You said you would teach me everything, and you did. And now I have lived a life I never could have imagined, all because you kept that promise." Isaac crossed the room and knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his. "Clara Langford, you are the greatest achievement of my life. Not the ranch, not the cattle, not any of it. You, the life we built together, the family we created. That is what matters. And I want you to know that every single day I spend with you is a gift. Every single day, I wake up grateful that you answered my advertisement, that you took a chance on me, that you let me into your heart." Clara leaned down and kissed him softly. "We took a chance on each other," she whispered. "And we won. Against all odds, we won." They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other, feeling the weight of all the years and all the love that had carried them through. Outside, the Nevada night was cold and clear, the stars brilliant in their infinite array. Inside, the fire crackled and popped, casting dancing shadows on the walls of the home they had built together. Isaac and Clara lived into their 70s, both of them remaining active and engaged until the very end. They died within months of each other, Isaac going first in his sleep one peaceful spring morning, and Clara following him that summer, her heart simply giving out as if it had decided there was no point in continuing without its other half. Their funeral was attended by hundreds of people. Family, friends, former ranch hands, students Clara had taught, readers whose lives had been changed by her words. The preacher spoke of their love and their legacy, of the way they had touched so many lives through their kindness and their example. But it was Jamie, their eldest son, who gave the eulogy that really captured who they had been. "My father once told me that he was desperately lonely before my mother arrived," Jamie said, his voice strong despite his grief. "He said he had land and cattle and a house, but he had no one to share it with, no one to build a future with. And my mother told me that she had resigned herself to a gray, unchanging life, to surviving but never truly living." They were both lost in their own ways, both searching for something they could not quite name. And then they found each other. A cowboy who loved books and believed in second chances, and a seamstress who could not read but who had more courage than anyone I have ever known. He promised to teach her everything, and he kept that promise. But she taught him just as much. She taught him about resilience and strength, about the power of determination, about what it means to truly love someone. Together, they built something extraordinary. Not just a successful ranch, not just a large family, but a legacy of love and kindness and possibility. They showed us all that it is never too late to become who you were meant to be, that education and knowledge can transform lives, that taking risks in the name of hope is always worthwhile. I will miss them every day for the rest of my life, but I am so grateful that they were my parents, that I got to witness their love story, that I was part of the life they built together. They taught us everything, just like my father promised my mother he would. And we will carry those lessons forward, passing them down to our children and our children's children, so that their legacy lives on. There was not a dry eye in the church by the time Jamie finished speaking. People embraced, sharing memories and stories, celebrating two lives well lived and a love that had endured through every challenge. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple headstone that read, Isaac and Clara Langford. Beloved parents, grandparents, and partners, he taught her everything. She taught him more. The ranch continued to thrive under Jamie's stewardship and eventually passed to his children and then to their children. Clara's newspapers and books remained in print, studied by historians and cherished by readers. The literacy programs she had started continued to operate, teaching new generations to read and write. The printing press was donated to a museum, where it was displayed with a plaque explaining its history and the remarkable woman who had used it. But the real legacy of Isaac and Clara Langford was not in the things they left behind, or the money they had earned, or even the words Clara had written. It was in the lives they had touched, in the example they had set, in the proof they offered that love and determination and belief in another person can truly change the world. They had been two lonely people who took a chance on each other, and in doing so, they had created something beautiful and lasting. Their story was passed down through the family like a precious heirloom, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that the best love stories are not about perfection, but about two imperfect people who choose each other every single day, who teach each other and learn from each other and build a life together one moment at a time. And in the end, that was everything.